For today's short meditation, let us turn our pages to Psalms 89, verses 1 to 10. Today we'll be looking into Great is His Faithfulness. We have a hymn based on how great is the faithfulness of God too. Have we ever thought about God's faithfulness, or lately have we ever come across God's faithfulness? Sometimes we wonder about, are we faithful to God? But are we looking into whether how God is faithful even when we are such a weaklings? We often focus on our own faithfulness and our own faith. Our living life, is it the good Christian life? Is it with the faithful, trusting and being faithful to God who cannot fail? And not that we are faithful to Him. Sometimes we're more prone to focus on, are we faithful, or how are we faithful to Him? Or we focus mostly about us. Have you ever thought about God's faithfulness? Because when we think about God's faithfulness, it is very great. And what should be our response to God's faithfulness? Because we tend to neglect His faithfulness towards us. Sometimes we ourselves, in the process of focusing on our own faith, we sometimes slip away. But even in those times, God's faithfulness is always there. That's why we say great is His faithfulness. First thing, our response for God's faithfulness should be to sing His faithfulness. As we see in verse 1, it says, I will sing of the Lord's great love forever. With my mouth I will make your faithfulness known to all generations. The first response from us for God's faithfulness, to be able to sing His faithfulness, to be able to praise His name, to give glory to His name for the faithfulness He's been showing. Sometimes when we see we are lacking, or sometimes when we see our unfaithfulness, we need to consider His faithfulness and remind ourselves how great is His faithfulness and how we should respond to Him. And we see in 1 John chapter 1 verse 9, it says, He is faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. We see how God is so faithful in forgiving us. Even though we lack the faithfulness, we see that how God is faithful in forgiving our sins. And we see He cleanses, He not just forgives us, but when we are in Him, He cleanses from all unrighteousness. And so we need to conclude our day by thinking, was we able to be praised for His faithfulness? Were we able to sing for His faithfulness today? That should be a reminder to end a day. And secondly, we see that it is to share God's faithfulness to others. First is to sing His faithfulness. And secondly, we see that it's to share God's faithfulness to our fellow brothers. The second part of the first verse, it says, with my mouth will I make known your faithfulness to all generations. It is through us in giving our testimonies, and we sometimes end up bragging about ourselves, where we forget the great essence of His faithfulness. So we need to be aware of that. Today here we come across this Psalms 89, where the psalmist says that he puts God first. Psalmist portrays God being very faithful, and we see how the psalmist is sharing God's faithfulness and not his faithfulness. Not the psalmist's faithfulness. He's not boasting about how faithful he is to God, but rather he is portraying, he is sharing to us how great is God's faithfulness. The psalmist is not telling what he has done, or he's not trying to boast or what he is, but here we see what the psalmist is trying to do is to portray God, what He has done, how faithful He was. As the psalmist is sharing God's faithfulness, it should even be our priority to share our God's faithfulness to others. And thirdly, we see that it is to submit to His faithfulness. In verse 7, we see that it says, in the council of the holy ones, God is greatly feared. He is more awesome than all who surround Him. Here we see that how our God is faithful. and how he's being feared. It's not the fear of getting punished, but it is the fear of reverence for how faithful he is being without fail. If we come across like, can we trust him today or can we depend on him? Yes, we can. We can every time. We can depend on him because he's faithful not to leave us. He's faithful not to let us go astray, but he's faithful even though we are not faithful towards him. So that's why we see not one of God's promises is being failed. Sometimes we promise and we fail to make it up to what we promised, but we see that God, none of his promises has been failed. Another way to think that will his grace go away? No, because he's faithful. He has a vast reach of his grace. God is faithful in everything. Even though in the things that we don't know, God is very faithful. It is all about how are we responding it to him. How are we answering him for his faithfulness? Even though we fail in our faith towards him, what should be our response? That should be our conclusion each and every day. Not just weekly ones or monthly ones or early ones, but every day. Did we sing of his faithfulness? Or did we share his faithfulness to others? Or did we submit to his faithfulness? We should be able to make sure by the end of the day that all these 3 steps is being covered up. That we should have sang his faithfulness, we should have shared it to the others, and we should have submitted. If that is not met in every day, we need to examine ourselves so that we can make it up to God's faithfulness. So let us try to respond to God each and every day without fail. Even though we are not being so faithful, for his faithful, we need to consider his faithfulness and his grace that he is being showing us in our day. And we need to be assured that he can be trusted and we can depend on him no matter what. Amen.